Hey guys, tonight we wake not in your cozy, air conditioned bedroom with the soft hum of traffic and the occasional ding of a notification, but in a Viking longhouse, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke, sweat, and something vaguely fishy that might have been dinner. Your bed is a pile of straw. Your blanket is a scratchy wool cloak that smells like wet sheep. And your pillow? That's your boots, stuffed with moss. As the fire crackles low, you notice the walls are hung not just with tools and shields, but with stories. Some are carved into wooden beams. Others, though, seem to shimmer in the torchlight from bare arms, backs, and necks. Ink, permanent marks on skin. You lean in. Tattoos. Viking tattoos. Not just decoration, but something far more potent, more mysterious, something alive. You probably won't survive the infection if you try to tattoo yourself with a splintered bone and ash today. But hey, that's part of the fun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up and squint across the smoky hall. A man is kneeling by the fire, shirtless, his back inked with a sprawling serpent coiled around what might be a tree or a god. His muscles twitch as he shifts. Another man, younger, is having something etched into his forearm right now, flinching as an older woman carefully taps what looks like a carved thorn into his skin. There are no gloves, no antiseptic, just soot, bone, and rhythm. You've stepped into a world where ink is more than art. It's power, it's history, and it's identity. But here's the thing. No Viking ever left behind a tattoo selfie. No parchment sketch. Not a single inked skin preserved in a museum freezer. What we know, we've had to piece together from scraps, from the whispers of foreign travelers, from archaeological oddities, from gaps in sagas, and from the half-remembered myths of Nordic magic. Which means that you're about to walk through one of the murkiest and most intriguing corners of Viking culture. The idea of Viking tattoos is both romantic and slippery. On one hand, it makes perfect sense. Here's a culture obsessed with symbolism, status, and visible strength. On the other, there's shockingly little direct evidence. But you don't let that stop you. Not tonight. You follow the scent of resin and animal fat out into the icy night. The stars above you are blindingly sharp. The fjord glitters like hammered silver. Your breath curls out in front of you, and your fingers ache from the cold. But just as you're thinking of turning back inside, you spot a woman carving runes into a piece of driftwood. Her forearms bear ink, dark shapes that seem to move with her pulse. You can't read them yet, but you will. Historians still argue whether tattoos were widespread among all Vikings, or reserved for a specific few. Were they warrior rites? Were they magical? Were they simply decorative? Or maybe all three? One thing is certain. For the Norse, symbols had weight. They weren't just pretty shapes. A spiral could ward off sea serpents. A raven could call Odin. A set of lines could bind a storm or bless a birth. In a world of oral storytelling, tattoos may have been the only written record you carried on your body. There's something else, too. Something not everyone wants to admit. Tattoos aren't just signs of bravery or piety. They're also messy. They blur lines. They cross borders. In a time when Christians began preaching about the sanctity of the body, inking yourself was borderline rebellious, or maybe even heretical. You wander to the edge of the settlement. There, beneath a slanted pine tree, lies a burial mound. Inside, if you could dig, you might find a skeleton wearing bronze jewelry, clutching a sword or a spindle, dressed in furs that long since rotted to dust. But if they had tattoos, those are gone. Skin doesn't last that long in Scandinavian soil. Still, some scholars speculate that patterns found on figurines and tapestries echo the same designs that might have once graced human flesh. Then there's that wild theory, don't laugh, about Viking Age body art glowing with fermented ink under firelight. Total guesswork. Sure, but poetic. One fringe historian even argued that tattoos were a sign of divine favor, only given after certain visions or dreams. Others push back, saying they were just as likely cosmetic, or even tribal markers, practical for identifying friend from foe when your helmet blocked your face and everyone was screaming in Old Norse. There's no conclusive evidence yet, but there is mystery. And mystery, like ink, stains the imagination. You head back inside the longhouse. The young man now bears a raw, swelling band of dots and lines just above his wrist. He cradles it like a sacred object. The older woman who marked him hands him a bowl of something warm, probably fermented fish stew, a reward for the pain. You lie back on your straw mat. The fire flickers. Shadows of ravens dance on the rafters. On the far wall, someone has carved the Vegvasir, the runic compass. It's meant to guide you through storms, even when the path is invisible. You wonder, what would you ink on your skin if every mark carried meaning? If your tattoos were your story, your soul, your spell? The longhouse goes quiet. The wind sighs against the timber walls. And outside, beyond the flickering firelight, the ink of night grows deeper. You wake to the sound of slow tapping, not music, not conversation, just an insistent rhythm, tap, 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 that seems to echo through the thick log walls and into your bones. It's still dark out, but someone has already lit the fire. The longhouse is warm, with breath and smoke, and you realize the tapping is coming from the woman with the ink-stained fingers. She's working again. This time, the needle is being pressed into the thigh of a broad-shouldered man, whose face is a study in controlled agony. You inch closer, not too close. You don't want to interrupt, or worse, volunteer. But curiosity gets the better of you. The tools are simple, brutally so. A splintered fishbone, sharpened to a point. A handle made of antler or driftwood, darkened by time and palm sweat. No buzzing machines, no sterile packaging. Just a handful of soot scraped from last night's fire and mixed with animal fat into a gritty black paste. She dips the tip of the needle into the sludge, then drives it into the skin. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike pushes pigment under the surface. Each strike creates a permanent wound, shaped into meaning. Pain is part of the point. You sit down, wincing in sympathy. There's no numbing ointment, no gloves. The woman hums under her breath, maybe to calm herself, maybe to distract the man. The ink oozes with every puncture, but he doesn't move. You wonder how many Vikings submitted themselves to this process. Historians still argue whether tattooing was common or rare, but one thing's clear. If they did it, it wasn't casually. This wasn't a drunken night out with the lads kind of activity. This was deliberate. slow, almost sacred. Let's not sugarcoat it. This probably hurt like hell. For days. Maybe weeks. Without antibiotics. The risk of infection was high, but that didn't stop them. In fact, it might have made the act even more meaningful. The suffering was proof of commitment, of identity. Think of it like earning your place on a longship, one painful dot at a time. The ingredients alone tell a story. Ash from sacred fires, soot from burnt yew or oak, sometimes mixed with urine, yes, urine, for binding power. Animal fat kept it pliable. Bone and wood added ritual texture. And the ink wasn't just a black blob. Depending on the burn, the paste could range from deep brown to bluish black. The placement mattered too. Wrists, to be seen when offering a hand. Thighs, kept hidden under wool, maybe for lovers' eyes only. Faces, rare, but not unheard of, especially if you were a shaman or wanted to scare the berserk out of your enemies before battle. A mainstream fact: Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan, in his 10th century writings, described the Rus, likely Norsemen traveling through modern-day Russia, as being tattooed from fingertips to neck with dark green trees and figures. Whether he exaggerated or not, it remains one of the most tantalizing early accounts linking Norsemen to full-body ink. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some scholars think Viking tattooists may have repurposed sewing needles, fish bones, or even porcupine quills from trade. There's a site in Gotland where bone tools were found alongside jars of carbon pigment. No one's labeled them tattoo kits officially, but come on, the archaeological silence is a problem. Skin doesn't survive centuries unless it's frozen or mummified. Unlike armor, coins, or pottery, tattoos leave no fossils. So we're left guessing, reading between ashes and artifacts, following the tap-tap-tap of ancient rituals with almost no visual proof. You watch the ink dry on the man's thigh. The symbol is unfamiliar to you, a knotwork spiral with something like claws branching from it. Maybe it's his clan sign, maybe a warning, maybe just his personal joke. He breathes out slowly and drinks from a horn of warm mead. The woman wipes her hands on a wool cloth blackened from dozens of other sessions. She says nothing. You can't help but wonder, did every Viking tattoo carry deep meaning? Or were some just for show? Maybe a sailor wanted a hammer of Thor just because it looked cool. Maybe a farmer got a goat because he liked goats. Not every symbol has to carry the weight of the cosmos. But still, most tattoos likely meant something. In a culture where myth and daily life were intertwined, skin became a kind of scroll, a moving, living, bleeding manuscript. It's hard to imagine what the process felt like. Hours of tapping, while someone held your limb still, chanting under their breath, maybe offering herbs to dull the sting. But you get the sense it wasn't purely a cosmetic decision. There was something ritualistic here, something between a medical procedure and a religious rite. You stretch your legs and head outside. The dawn is breaking. Pale gold light catches on the frost-covered trees. Your breath fogs the air. You feel a phantom ache on your arm, as if your own skin remembers something it never had. You hear stories among the early Norse that tattooing was done before war, that warriors marked themselves before raids, hoping to return with glory, or at least ensure the Valkyries could identify them. Others say tattoos were gifts from the gods themselves, delivered in dreams and etched by those who walked between worlds. Historians still argue whether Viking tattooists were respected artisans, lowly service workers, or something like spiritual intermediaries, the line between healer and carver was often blurred. Some tattooists may have doubled as bone setters, herbalists, or rune readers. You return to the longhouse. The fire is burning bright again. The tap-tap has stopped. The man with the new tattoo has fallen asleep, his leg wrapped in linen. His pain is fresh, but soon it will harden into pride, into permanence. You lie down and stare at the roof beams overhead, wondering what your symbol would be, what you'd choose to carry for the rest of your life, and whether it would still matter once your name was forgotten but your bones remained. Outside, the frost begins to melt, but the ink remains. You don't notice the woman with the ink until she's almost beside you. She moves like a shadow, silent but deliberate, carrying a bundle of carved wooden panels under one arm and a pouch of dark paste at her belt. She doesn't speak. She just gestures for you to follow, and you do, because by now you've learned not to ignore the quiet people in Viking stories. She leads you to a small hut near the edge of the village, not a longhouse, but something older, rounder. Inside, the smoke is thicker, the light dimmer, and the walls are covered with symbols, spirals, serpents, wolves, trees with tangled roots that turn into dragons, eyes, so many eyes. You're not in an artist's studio, you're in a shrine, and every symbol here is a piece of the Norse mind made visible. Tattoos, here, are not just markings, they are mythology, etched into flesh. The Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr, who circles the world and will one day bring about Ragnarok, stretches across one panel. You recognize it from an armband you saw earlier, looped 3 times around a warrior's bicep. Another panel shows Yggdrasil, the world tree, its roots and branches crawling in intricate knots, similar to a woman's back tattoo you glimpsed when she bent to lift a bucket. These designs are not random. They are deliberate. Norse mythology wasn't just told, it was worn. And it wasn't limited to gods and monsters. Sometimes you see the Valknut, the 3 interlocking triangles associated with Odin and death. Sometimes it's Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, a blunt, squared symbol for strength and protection. Occasionally, you spot a small raven, likely Hugin or Munin, Odin's thought and memory birds, who travel the world and whisper secrets into his ears. Even animals had symbolic meaning. Wolves like Fenrir, symbols of destruction and destiny. Bears for strength and primal force. Serpents for cunning and the unknown. Every image was layered. Nothing was just what it seemed. Mainstream fact: Viking iconography has long fascinated historians because it blends myth, cosmology, and war. Runes and symbols appear on swords, amulets, ships, and burial stones. But when these motifs appear in modern tattoo replicas, they often trace back to archaeological finds, not surviving tattoos. So what we think we know about Viking ink is often extrapolated from carved stones and jewelry, not actual skin. But here's the quirky twist. Some scholars argue that Viking designs may have been intentionally distorted to confuse outsiders. You know how modern companies hide Easter eggs in logos? This may have been similar. The more layered the symbol, the more only insiders would know the true meaning. The wrong curve on a rune could turn a spell of protection into one of misfortune. As you walk around the hut, you begin to notice patterns repeating. Knotwork that loops endlessly, interlocking lines with no clear beginning or end. These motifs might have symbolized the cyclical nature of life, death, and fate, or they were just really really good at geometry. Historians still argue whether knotwork had specific meanings or was simply a favored aesthetic, much like plaid pants in the 1970s, but with more ritual sacrifice. You remember the warrior from last night, the one whose back bore the serpent coiled around a tree. You didn't realize it at the time, but it was probably a reference to Ragnarok, the end times battle where gods die, the sky burns, and the Midgard serpent rises from the sea. Casual. These tattoos aren't cheerful. They're heavy with fate, destiny, and the constant presence of death. For a people who believed that the Norns, three women who wove human fate like thread, had already decided your future, a tattoo might have been your only way to speak back, to choose something, to brand your own skin in defiance or faith. You sit on a low stool. The ink woman hands you a carved panel. It's old, smooth, warm from her body. On it is a design you've seen twice now, a triangle inside a circle, lined with thorns. You ask what it means. She just shrugs. Some say it's for childbirth. She mutters. Others say it's a charm to call lightning. That's the thing. These symbols shift. Meanings overlap. And often, they're only revealed to those who wear them. Tattoos were not mass-produced. They were intimate, customized, and often secret. It wasn't like modern times where you can Google the top 10 Viking symbols and get a nice Pinterest board. Back then, each community had its own dialect of symbols. One design might mean protection in one fjord, and doom in another. Local meanings mattered. Oral memory shaped interpretation. You ask her again, what should someone never tattoo? She looks at you with a half smile and says, your own name. The gods already know it. No need to remind them. RT. A breeze slips through the cracks in the wall. The fire flickers. You realize that for many Vikings, ink wasn't ornamental. It was functional, protective, instructive, a way to turn skin into story, into prayer, into shield. You trace your finger over the carved panel again, wondering what your skin would say if it could be read like a rune stone. As you leave the hut, the early sun breaks through the clouds, striking a nearby standing stone. Someone has chalked symbols into it, runes, of course, but also images that echo what you saw on the tattooed villagers. The ink may have faded from history's skin, but the patterns remain, on stone, on wood, in whispered legend. You head back into the village, feeling the weight of it all, the gravity of wearing your beliefs, your stories, your fate on your skin, the quiet pride of a people who didn't need books because they carried their truth on their bodies. One knot, one hammer, one serpent at a time. The next day breaks slower. Fog clings to the fjord, rolling low over the village like the breath of some ancient beast. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak, boots crunching softly on frost-covered ground. There's a restlessness in the air, an edge, as if something's about to happen. You follow a group of men and women gathering at the edge of the village, near the wooden palisade. They're warriors, clearly, faces weathered, cloaks frayed, weapons slung over their backs with casual confidence. And they all bear tattoos. You spot an axe tattoo curling over one man's shoulder blade, inked to look like it's piercing his skin. Another has twin ravens stretching from his collarbone across his chest. One woman, tall and calm-eyed, bears a line of runes climbing her neck like ivy. They don't just wear ink, they display it. you realize you're looking at a form of social armor. In a world without uniforms, where helmets covered faces and clan loyalties shifted with the tides, tattoos told you who someone was before they spoke. They could broadcast your victories, warn enemies, rally allies, or even serve as psychological warfare. Imagine charging into battle, shirtless and shrieking, your chest covered with the wolfish snarl of Fenrir. Yeah, you'd rethink your life choices. A mainstream fact. Some historians believe tattoos may have functioned like portable heraldry for Vikings, especially when traveling to foreign lands. Just like shields bore unique designs, your skin could carry your saga. A warrior might tattoo a depiction of a famous raid, a captured city, or a fallen brother. Each mark, a notch in your legend. And these tattoos weren't dainty. The designs you see now are bold, graphic, and high contrast, meant to be seen from a distance. Thick lines, strong shapes. Most are black or dark blue, but occasionally you catch hints of other hues, maybe from berry-based dyes, iron oxide, or crushed minerals. The group begins to move toward the fjord where a longship waits. It's not a war party, not yet, just a training mission maybe, or a show of strength. But the ritual is the same. Before they leave, the warriors gather in a circle. One of the elders, bearded and tattooed like a living oak tree, steps forward. He carries a bowl of ash and a carved bone stylus. One by one, the warriors stretch out their forearms, and he traces the bone across their skin. No blood this time, just gesture, a blessing, a reminder. You feel the hum of it, the way the ink becomes more than decoration. It's armor, not just for the body, but for the soul. You slip closer, watching as one young man rolls up his sleeve to reveal a new tattoo still wrapped in cloth. He peels it back with reverence. It's the Helm of Awe, Aegis Yalmer, an 8-armed radial symbol meant to instill fear in enemies and protect the wearer from harm. Think of it as a magical landmine on your bicep. You've read that symbol before, maybe on a t-shirt or in some metal band's album art. But here, in the cold and fog, it crackles with something older. It's not aesthetic. It's ancestral. There's even a fringe theory, brace yourself, that Vikings believed tattoos bled spirit, that the act of being tattooed released part of your soul into the ink, bonding it with the image. Some claim this allowed a piece of your essence to continue fighting even if your body fell. Think Viking Horcruxes, but with slightly more blood and slightly fewer wizards. Historians still argue whether warriors received tattoos as initiations or only after notable acts. Some suggest you had to earn each mark. Others argue the tattoos were protective talismans applied before a voyage, much like modern soldiers getting unit patches. Either way, no one got inked just because they were bored on a Tuesday. You begin to spot patterns. Warriors often ink symbols that reflect their strengths. A seafaring raider might have wave motifs or sea serpents. A berserker, bare paws or clawed hands. Archers might favor hawks or piercing runes shaped like arrowheads. And sometimes, the symbols are darker. One man bears a skeletal hand wrapped around his forearm, fingers trailing toward his palm. You ask what it means. Someone tells you softly, it's the hand of the Draugr, the dead who walk. He believes it keeps them from taking him. So tattoos weren't just about identity or intimidation. They were also talismans, wards, warnings. Each image a spell you wore into battle, a statement to gods and ghosts alike. You take a closer look at the Elder's ink. It runs across his scalp and neck in jagged, chaotic lines. Some of the symbols you recognize: runes for protection, thunder, strength. Others are unfamiliar, perhaps personal, or forgotten. His skin is a map of decades. You can't read it all, but you know the journey must have been brutal. He turns and looks at you, doesn't say a word, just taps the bone stylus gently on the rim of the ash bowl and gestures toward your arm. You hesitate. You don't have the scars. You haven't crossed the sea or buried friends in the ice. You're just an observer, a traveler through story. But still, you reach out your forearm, just for a moment. And he traces something into the skin, not inked, not real, but it feels like a promise. Then the warriors board the ship. You stand on the shore and watch them disappear into the fog. The water swallows the boat, the runes, the inked flesh, all gone into the gray. But you feel changed, as if something unspoken was passed to you in that moment, a symbol without a name. You walk back through the village alone, the image still tingling on your arm. Whatever it was, it meant something. The next longhouse you enter is quieter. There's no fire roaring, no warriors sharpening blades, no laughter echoing from the rafters. Instead, there's the soft shuffle of bare feet, the creak of wooden benches, and the rhythmic hiss of steam from a cauldron in the corner. This is not a warrior's home. It belongs to the thralls. Thralls, Viking slaves, prisoners of war, the conquered and traded, don't get much voice in the sagas. But tonight, you're sitting among them. And here, in this softer, dimmer space, you catch sight of tattoos you weren't expecting. A woman tending the cauldron has thin bands wrapped around her ankles, 3 dark rings, one for each of her children. Another man, broad-shouldered and quiet, bears a jagged line across the bridge of his nose, crossing into his hairline. At first, you think it's a scar, but no, the ink is too precise. Not all Viking tattoos told glorious tales. Some told you who owned whom. A mainstream historical fact: slavery was deeply woven into Viking society. Thralls were captured in raids or born into servitude. They worked farms, rowed ships, cooked meals, raised children not always their own, and, in some cases, they were branded. Yes, branded. Literally. Scholars believe some thralls bore inked or burned marks indicating their status. On the forehead, the arms, the chest. These weren't badges of honor. They were meant to humiliate, to reduce someone's identity to a possession. But the stories get complicated, as they always do. Not all inked thralls were victims of cruelty. Some chose tattoos for personal reasons, quiet acts of defiance, mourning, or even pride. You sit across from a younger thrall, maybe 15 winters old, stirring a pot of barley. On his wrist is a tiny mark, a single rune. You can't read it, not clearly, but it might be alges, a symbol of protection. He catches your glance and tugs his sleeve down. No explanation. Just that brief flicker of secrecy. You begin to understand. Viking tattoos existed on a spectrum. They weren't just for the celebrated. They were also for the forgotten. A fringe theory suggests that some thralls, especially those taken from other cultures, Irish, Slavic, Baltic, brought their own tattoo traditions with them. A blend of ink styles may have emerged in longhouses where identities blurred. You can almost picture it. A woman from the East, captured in a raid, adding her people's spiral tattoos to the ankle of a Norse child she raised. Silent legacies passed through skin. Historians still argue whether slave tattoos were always punitive or if some were repurposed, claimed, even transformed by their wearers over time. Imagine turning your brand into a charm, your mark of ownership into a symbol of your survival. A soft laugh catches your attention. An older woman leans against the far wall, her hair streaked with silver. Her arms are bare, and there, just beneath her shoulder, is a faded tattoo. Two fish, swimming in opposite directions. You ask what it means. She replies, simply, "It means I've been here and there, and I'm still swimming." You grin. She grins back. That's the thing about ink. It endures. You glance at the walls. Even here, symbols are etched into the beams, not fancy ones, just small scratches, names, moon phases, animal shapes, marks left by hands not allowed to write histories, but who found other ways to be remembered. Not all thralls stayed thralls. Some earned freedom, wealth, even status. A few married into the very families who once owned them. Did their tattoos carry over? Did they wear their past openly? Or did they hide it under new clothes, new names? One quiet theory suggests that certain tattoo motifs signaled a thrall's skills, a loom shape for a weaver, an axe for a woodsman, a loaf for a baker. Practical ink in a practical society. Labels of value in a world where labor defined identity. You sit in the warmth of the kitchen space, watching steam rise. The food smells better here than in the warrior's hall. Maybe it's the herbs. Maybe it's the company. One man approaches and offers you a wooden cup. He gestures to his own arm, where a fox is inked in simple lines. Fast, he says. Then he taps his temple. And clever. It's the first English he's spoken, and you're caught off guard. You nod. That you are. He smiles and walks away, leaving you with the slow realization that the stories carved into thrall skin weren't just survival. They were resistance, a way to claim space in a world that offered none. You wonder how many modern Viking-inspired tattoos trace back to these unknown hands, to the ones who weren't written about but who still left marks. Maybe your favorite Norse symbol, carefully etched on a bicep in 2023, originated not from a warrior king but from a weaver woman who sang to her children while boiling fish bones and tracing stars on the floor. You leave the longhouse quietly, the smell of herbs still clinging to your clothes. Outside, the fog has lifted, and the stars are back, sharp and distant, like memory. Some tattoos shout, others whisper. You'll remember both. It's the middle of the night when you wake again, though honestly, in the land of endless twilight, it's hard to tell. The coals in the longhouse hearth glow low, casting red shadows across the beams. A few snores rumble gently in the dark, and you think about drifting back to sleep. But then you hear it. A soft murmuring, almost like singing, but broken and quiet. Words you don't understand. You sit up, across the room. Someone is stirring by the fire, sleeves rolled up, a long strip of cloth in her lap. She's running her thumb across her inner arm, slowly, rhythmically. You edge closer and see what she's looking at. A tattoo, simple, nearly faded, but clearly visible. It's just a line of runes, tiny and tucked into the skin where the ribs curve. You ask quietly what they say. She doesn't answer right away, just keeps humming. Then finally, his name, my firstborn, drowned at sea. You don't know what to say, so you sit beside her in silence. Sometimes, that's enough. Tattoos weren't always for gods or glory. Sometimes they were for grief. In this world where life is short and the sea unforgiving, Vikings found ways to carry memory beyond the grave. Ink on the skin could serve as mourning, memorial, or quiet tribute. Not all tattoos screamed for attention. Some whispered only to the wearer. Mainstream fact. Though Viking sagas rarely mention tattoos directly, Norse culture had deep traditions of marking memory, runes on memorial stones, elegies spoken at graves, charms etched into weapons. It stands to reason that some memories were worn too, especially in places no one else could see. One fringe theory? That certain body placements were intentionally hidden, designed to protect a private grief from the eyes of strangers. A rune placed on the inner thigh, a symbol tucked behind the ear. You wouldn't find it unless you were allowed to. The woman beside you traces the runes again. She explains, in halting words, that she tattooed it herself after he was lost. She heated a bone needle over the fire, mixed soot with her own blood. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't meant to be. It was necessary. You feel the weight of it, of her, of that quiet, enduring love. Not all Viking tattoos marked victory. Some marked loss. You begin noticing more of them in the days that follow as you wander from hearth to hearth, longhouse to longhouse. You see other quiet inks. A fish, drawn in a child's shaky style, on a woman's ankle. A moon and wolf symbol hidden under a tunic sleeve. A series of dots on the back of one man's hand. 4, then 1, then 4 again. You don't ask what it means. You just remember it. Historians still argue whether Vikings used tattoos specifically for mourning, or whether we're projecting modern sentiment onto the past. But grief is timeless. And the human instinct to mark what we love and lose, that's older than writing. You think of modern tattoos, names and dates inked on wrists, portraits on backs, coordinates of where someone died. The impulse hasn't changed, only the tools. One man you meet wears a broken tree inked across his ribs, jagged and raw looking. You ask him its meaning. He shrugs. It doesn't grow anymore, he says. But it still stands. You don't need more explanation. That's the thing about these quiet tattoos. They aren't for others to admire. They aren't stories to boast or warnings to enemies. They're a kind of ritual, a reckoning. You feel your own chest ache as you consider the people you've lost, those whose names fade in your mind like old ink in sun. Would you mark them, if you could? Etch their memory into yourself so it never blurs? You sit by the shore one night, watching the tide pull away. The sea is black glass, moonlit and slow. Somewhere, far out there, are the bones of ships that never returned. And maybe, floating above them in the deep, are ghosts with inked arms still reaching for home? You close your eyes and picture the hidden tattoos of the Viking world, not the bold, brash ones we talk about in museums, but the secret ones, the ink pressed into rib cages, wrapped around fingers, tucked under hairlines, love letters, apologies, farewells. A woman joins you silently, wraps a cloak over your shoulders, and traces a rune on your palm with her finger. It's not ink, it's temporary, but you feel it sink in. Not every Viking carried a sword, some carried a story, and sometimes the only way to keep that story alive was to wear it. You wake to drums, not the kind you dance to. These are slower, heavier, more like distant thunder than music. You blink, sit up, and realize you're not in the village anymore. You're on a boat, or more accurately, under a boat, a burial ship. The air smells of damp wood, pine resin, and something sweet and cloying, perhaps the remains of old incense, or the final offerings left to rot with the dead. You shuffle forward cautiously, ducking beneath the curved hull ribs. A flicker of movement catches your eye. At first, you think it's just the play of light. Then you see it clearly. A figure, dressed in funeral robes, lying still amid furs, weapons, and vessels. Their hands are crossed, their jaw tied shut. They are dead, but they're not alone. There are marks on their skin. You creep closer. Runes, spirals, animal forms, barely visible now, but unmistakable. Tattooed across the arms, the collarbone, even the throat. You swallow. The body is ancient, and the ink is fading, yet something about the design still hums with meaning. Not all tattoos were meant for the living. Mainstream fact: Viking burial practices varied wildly, from cremation to ship burials to mound interments. But many elite burials included highly personalized items, weapons, jewelry, sacrificed animals, even thralls. While skin doesn't usually survive the centuries, some scholars believe tattoos may have played a role in preparing the body for the afterlife. One possibility: tattoos acted as spiritual passports. You imagine it now, a soul arriving at the gates of Valhalla, showing the Valkyries the marks on their skin, a hammer of Thor on the shoulder, a raven for Odin on the neck, a binding rune to keep hell at bay. Not just proof of courage, but spiritual credentials. You shuffle further inside the burial chamber. You see small objects laid beside the corpse: a comb, a drinking horn, a runestone etched with the same symbol tattooed on the body's forearm. This is not a coincidence. There's a theory among some folklorists that certain tattoos may have been copied from carved stones or family talismans and worn into death. The idea that your body becomes a portable shrine, your very flesh a canvas of your beliefs, hopes, and alliances. The symbols guide you, like celestial signposts, through the 9 realms. You sit quietly, heart pounding just a little, not from fear, but from the enormity of it all. It's one thing to decorate yourself in life. It's another to carry that meaning into death. You remember something: Ibn Fadlan's account, where he describes a Rus chieftain's funeral. He talks about the burning of the ship, the sacrifices, the strange rituals, but he never mentions tattoos. Still, that doesn't mean they weren't there. They may simply have faded. Or, like so much about tattoos, may have been taken for granted. Historians still argue whether the Vikings tattooed their dead after death as part of funerary rites. The evidence is slim, but consider this. Some Arctic cultures practiced post-mortem body marking, believing it protected the soul. Could the Norse have done the same? You can't help but wonder. You run your fingers along the boat's edge. The wood is cracked and dark with time, but there, carved into the beam, is a symbol you now recognize: the Vegvisir, the runic compass. May you never lose your way in storms, even when the path is not known. You look again at the figure in the ship. Their lips are stitched shut, their skin marked, their eyes closed forever. But somehow, they still speak. Back outside, you wander toward the burial mounds that dot the hills like sleeping giants. Some are simple, others vast, marked with standing stones and carved markers. You can't see the bodies, of course, but you begin to picture them all, wrapped in fur, laid with care, their tattoos still visible beneath the layers of time. One fringe theory? That families would tattoo themselves with matching marks, so that, in the next life, they could find each other. Picture it: a mother, a daughter, a brother, each bearing a variant of the same rune, a signal, a tether. Even in the halls of the gods, you wouldn't be alone. You sit beside one mound, tracing your fingers through the frost-bitten moss. You imagine what your own skin would carry if you lived in this world. Would it be your story, your family, your fears, or maybe your questions? Some say the dead speak through dreams, that the ink they bore whispers in sleep. Maybe that's what this journey is, a dream of skin and story, etched deeper each night. A raven circles overhead. You lie back on the mound and close your eyes. You don't remember falling asleep. But in your dream, you walk the bridge between worlds, and on your arms, glowing faintly in the dark, are symbols you finally understand. When you wake again, the sky is pink and violet, stretched wide over a field that smells of heather and pine. A breeze moves through the grass like breath, and near the edge of the clearing, you see them, women, not warriors, not priestesses, either. Just ordinary Viking women, tending goats, gathering herbs, mending clothes. But as you get closer, you realize they're not so ordinary. They are tattooed, not all over, not brazenly. The marks are subtle, peeking out from under sleeves, stitched into the folds of skin like whispered secrets. You notice a spiral on a collarbone, a series of dots trailing up a finger, a thin rune tucked just below the ear. You stop pretending to look casual. You're staring, and they notice. One woman, older than the rest, with long gray braids and a face like a crumpled map, raises her sleeve to show you a tattoo on her inner forearm, a small seed with branching roots. She smiles. "This," she says, "was for the baby I lost. Then I gave birth to twins. So I kept it for all of them." You feel your chest tighten. You nod. Mainstream historical fact. Although Norse sagas and histories focus heavily on men, Viking women held significant roles in society. They managed households, farms, property, and often spiritual rites. While there's no direct evidence of women's tattoos surviving, the rich tradition of female symbolism in Viking art suggests they were just as likely to mark their skin as men, perhaps even more so. You begin to see a pattern. The tattoos here are deeply personal. Fertility symbols, moon phases, midwives with inked crescents on their hands, healers with snake motifs, reminiscent of Jormungandr, yes, but also of the ancient Norse idea of cycles, rebirth, and hidden knowledge. One woman bears a stylized tree that branches across her shoulder blades. It's not Yggdrasil, exactly, but close. "It's my family tree," she tells you. "Each branch is a child. Some are still here. Some are not." You're quiet for a long time after that. Fringe theory that women may have used tattoos as forms of magical protection, especially during childbirth. Norse women often invoked protective deities like Frigg and Freya, and some believe that tattooed charms placed on the abdomen, thighs, or spine could have served as spiritual armor during labor. Not scientifically proven, but spiritually satisfying. Historians still argue whether Viking women participated in tattooing as ritualists, artists, or simply recipients. Some suggest they may have been the primary tattooists, especially within their communities, using needles not just for cloth, but for skin. After all, who better to wield a bone needle than someone who spent her days sewing fate into clothing? You watch as one young woman paints a symbol onto a girl's wrist with a mixture of berry juice and soot. It's a trial run, she explains, just a temporary ink to test how it feels. If the girl still wants it after a week, they'll do it for real. The design? A fox paw print. She's fast, the woman says, laughing, and a bit sly. It suits her. You realize something else. These tattoos aren't just sacred or sad. They're playful, too. Expressive. A way of saying, this is who I am. Not to gods or enemies, but to yourself. One woman shows you a tattoo on the side of her foot. A fish skeleton. You raise an eyebrow. My husband's a fisherman, she says. That's all I see of him. You both laugh. You begin to see the deeper rhythm of this place. Tattoos for love, for loss, for motherhood, for laughter, for protection, for fun. A full spectrum of human experience, drawn in ash and patience. And the placement matters. A tattoo on the palm, for a healer, always visible in her craft, on the inner thigh, intimate, personal, perhaps for lovers, perhaps for self. One woman winks and says hers is for Freya, goddess of love and war. She would understand. A spiral over the heart, a tree at the base of the spine, a hawk on the nape of the neck, meant to fly with your thoughts. Perhaps you sit with the women as they weave and mend. They talk about the designs they've considered, the meanings they imagine. One speaks of tattooing a sun between her shoulder blades, so it rises every time she stands tall. You ask if they worry the tattoos will fade. One smiles. Everything fades, she says. But while it lasts, it reminds me I was here. I mattered. The simplicity of it nearly breaks you. You lie back in the grass as the women carry on, weaving, laughing, occasionally humming old songs. You hear words in the melodies. Freya, Frigg, sea foam, cradle, storm, names and stories stitched into the rhythm of life. Not all Viking tattoos were etched in blood and battle. Some were stitched in laughter, some in quiet defiance, some in the sacred, silent space between motherhood and magic. And you know, without question now, Viking women wore ink not just to belong, but to speak when no one else was listening. The sound draws you from the meadow before dawn, not drums this time, but something sharper, repetitive, steady, like a heartbeat made of bone. You follow it, past the longhouses, through mist-soaked grass, down a trail worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. The noise gets louder, tap, 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 then you see it, a clearing lit only by the orange flicker of firelight. A small group of people sits in a tight circle, shoulders hunched, breath steaming. In the center, a tattooist at work. There is no audience, no performance, just the quiet, solemn act of making a permanent wound. You kneel at the edge of the circle and watch. The tattooist, an older man with silver braids and soot-stained fingers, dips his bone needle into a thick black paste. The mixture smells of pine pitch, ash, and animal fat. He leans forward, murmuring something under his breath, and begins tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. The recipient, a young man, barely more than a boy, grits his teeth, hands clenched into the grass. The tattoo is being carved into his chest, just over his heart, The pain is real. So is the purpose. You've seen tattoos before in this world, but this feels different. More than decoration, more than identity. This is ritual. Mainstream fact. Across many cultures, including some Arctic and Central Asian societies that traded with or influenced the Norse, tattooing was a sacred act. It wasn't always done in private, but it was usually overseen by someone with spiritual or social authority. Many believe Norse tattooing may have followed similar lines, especially when marks were connected to rites of passage. The boy doesn't cry out, though sweat beads on his brow. The design is complex, interwoven runes radiating outward like spokes of a wheel. You count 8 lines. The helm of awe again? Or something else? One of the others in the circle leans close and whispers, "It's for strength, for not breaking." You nod slowly. The bone needle continues tapping. You've heard stories of ritual tattooing performed before battle, before voyages, before marriages. In those moments of transformation, when you stop being one thing and become another. The Norse may have turned to ink and pain to mark the change. A fringe theory even suggests that the pain itself was essential to the magic, that blood awakened the ink, that your suffering sealed the symbol. There are echoes of this in later folk practices, cutting your palm to seal an oath, drawing blood before a blessing, biting your lip when you speak to the dead. You look again at the tattooist. His movements are precise, unhurried. He is not an artist in the modern sense. He is a technician of transformation, a ritual surgeon. Historians still argue whether Viking tattooing was considered spiritual, medicinal, or merely ornamentary, but it's clear that in moments like this, the act holds more weight than aesthetics. This is about endurance, passage, becoming. The group sits in silence. No one speaks unless necessary. The air is thick with anticipation and the faint scent of burning pine. Occasionally, the tattooist dips his needle again, murmuring what might be a spell or a prayer. You glance around and see others in the group bearing similar marks. Chest tattoos, symbols on the throat, a woman with a black sunburst around her navel, another man with runes trailing down each finger. One boy's ears are ringed with inked dots. He sees you looking and grins. "Every year survived," he says. "I got one when I turned 12. My father says if I reach 20, I'll need new ears." You can't help but laugh softly. Another girl shows you the inside of her lip, where a rune has been etched so it only shows when she smiles. These aren't just rituals. They're intimate challenges, personal affirmations. In a harsh world, your body becomes your scroll, your shield, your altar. The boy in the center slumps forward. The tattooist nods, finished. Someone wraps a cloth over the design, presses gently. Another offers the boy a carved wooden cup. He drinks deeply, then exhales. You don't know what's in the cup. Mead? Painkiller herbs? Something stronger? You ask the tattooist what the symbol means. He replies simply, "It tells the gods who he is. Not what he is, not what he's done. Who?" The fire crackles low. Someone begins to sing, softly, in a language that coils around the back of your mind. The kind of song you don't need to understand to feel. It's not joyous, but it's not mourning either. It's witnessing. And you begin to wonder, maybe tattooing was never just about claiming your story. Maybe it was about being seen by those who mattered, the gods, the dead, the self. You look down at your own arm, still blank, still modern, But your mind feels tattooed now, etched with images and questions that won't fade. You rise, stretch your legs, and leave the clearing just as the sun breaks over the trees. Your ears still echo with the sound tap, tap, tap. The next place you find yourself is not a battlefield or a burial site. It's quiet. A hut, small and dark, with shelves packed full of bones, stones, feathers, and bowls of strange black paste. The air smells of dried herbs and iron. A curtain of beads clacks softly as you enter. A woman waits inside, cross-legged by the fire. Her eyes are cloudy, not from age, but from some other kind of seeing. She doesn't look up when you enter, just gestures toward a cushion across from her. You sit. The fire crackles low, and in the glow, you notice her arms, inked from wrist to shoulder, runes stacked like stairways, circles nested inside other circles, snakes biting their own tails. And yet, the tattoos feel quiet, not decorative, not proud, just there, like smoke is there, or breath. She reaches into a bowl and pulls out a small bone stylus. It's been carved with runes too, tiny ones, nearly worn smooth by years of touch. Without speaking, she begins to draw on your forearm, not piercing, not bleeding, just marking the skin with charcoal and water. As she draws, she hums, and then you see them, runes, not just letters, but symbols with teeth. Mainstream fact. Viking runes were part of the Elder Futhark, a writing system used across early Germanic cultures. But they weren't just for communication. Runes held magical weight. Carving them was an act of intention. Saying them aloud could bless or curse. When inscribed into weapons, jewelry, or stones, they were thought to carry power far beyond ink and wood. Now imagine what it meant to carve them into your flesh. The rune she draws on you is Rado, R, the symbol of travel, of the journey, of movement between worlds. A fitting mark, considering where you've been. She speaks. Finally. This one protects those who wander, she says, voice soft but sure. But it also marks them. It tells the spirits, this one is passing through. A fringe theory? Some believe runes tattooed on skin were active spells, charging the body like a living talisman. You weren't just writing messages, you were carrying enchantments, blood-bound and permanent. Certain combinations, if arranged carefully, were believed to affect luck, love, weather, even death. Historians still argue whether these tattooed runes were interpreted literally or metaphorically. Did Thurisaz, the thorn rune, truly summon giants? Or was it symbolic, a personal thorn to overcome? The woman finishes her mark and leans back, watching the way your skin drinks the blackness. Some people choose their own runes, she murmurs. Others are chosen. She looks into your eyes, and for a moment you feel very, very seen. There's a small shelf beside the hearth, filled with what might be charms, runestones, bits of metal, carved driftwood, but among them you spot something odd. A small strip of cured animal skin, rolled tight and tied with twine. The woman sees your gaze. They used to write spells on skin, she says. Sometimes animal, sometimes not. You pause. Human? She nods. Just once. Not all runes were written to be read by others. Some were hidden, buried under clothes, tattooed into the soles of feet or under the tongue. One Norse charm, described in later Icelandic grimoires, was supposed to be tattooed inside the mouth, its power only activated when spoken aloud in battle. You imagine that, now, a warrior, bloodied and reeling, spitting out a curse that's been waiting under their tongue for years. The woman begins to draw again, this time on herself. A new rune, fresh and wet, over an old faded one. You ask her what it means. Old meanings fade, she says. New meanings find them. That line sits in your head like an ember. You glance around the hut. On one wall, a tapestry is embroidered with strange runic sequences, none you recognize from any museum. She must see your curiosity. Some runes don't live in books, she says. They live in bodies. You shiver. One of the strangest discoveries archaeologists have made was a 10th century comb case with a runic charm that, when translated, roughly means comb my hair, comb my fate. A simple item, but marked with cosmic significance. If even a comb held power, imagine the significance of a rune pressed permanently into your chest. And not just any rune, your rune. The one that fits you like a spine fits your shadow. She asks if you want to keep the mark she's drawn. It's not a casual question. You hesitate, not out of fear, out of awe, because now you understand. Runic tattoos were not simply personal. They were interactive. They could respond to the world, to events, to dreams. Your skin became a map of change. You decline, for now. But you bow as you leave, the mark still cooling on your arm like a secret. Outside, the air is bright again. The village is stirring. Somewhere, someone is baking bread. Somewhere else, someone is singing a lullaby to a child. And in the shadow of the Rune Witch's hut, you feel like you've walked out of a spell and back into yourself. Ink can record history, but runes, they speak it, and sometimes they speak you. You wake to reindeer bells. At first you think you're dreaming again, but no, the chime is real, soft and distant, echoing through a snowy landscape far from the Viking village you've come to know. The trees here are shorter, gnarled, wind-bitten, the wind sharper, the sky pale, blue and endless. You are in the far north now, deep into Sami country. The Sami are the indigenous people of the Arctic North, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula in Russia. They are reindeer herders, shamans, storytellers, and, possibly, tattoo artists with secrets no one can fully decode. A small group gathers in a circular tent, lavu, they call it, its poles rising like ribs around a central fire. They invite you in with quiet gestures and curious eyes. You sit beside the smoke hole, fingers tingling from cold, and then you see them, tattoos, not the bold, swirling Norse knotwork you've grown used to. These are finer, almost geometric, rows of dots along the knuckles, braided bands circling the wrists, tiny symbols tucked behind ears or into hairlines. You'd miss them if you didn't know what to look for. One woman, older than winter, rolls back her sleeve to reveal a row of tiny chevrons crawling up her forearm. This, she says, is for the spirits. Mainstream fact. The Sami, though distinct from the Norse, were in close contact with Viking-age Scandinavians through trade, conflict, and cultural exchange. Some Sami traditions, including body modification and shamanic rites, deeply influenced Norse magical practices. Fringe theory? Some believe Sami shamans, noitis, used tattoos to mark spiritual rank. Each dot, each symbol, a memory of visions, a map of journeys made while in trance. Others argue the marks were medicinal, placed along pain points in the body to bind disease or weakness. You watch as the woman dips her finger into a small pot of soot mixed with reindeer fat and tallow. She dots a fresh symbol onto her grandson's wrist, a protection mark, she tells you, before he begins his first migration. The boy doesn't flinch. He's proud. Historians still argue whether Sami tattooing was common or rare. Most written sources come from much later, and were penned by outsiders who often misunderstood or mistrusted Sami spirituality. Christian missionaries in the 17th and 18th centuries actively destroyed Sami religious items and outlawed practices, leaving behind only fragments of knowledge. But fragments are enough for now. The designs are mesmerizing, not decorative, not entirely readable, a combination of code, prayer, and map. Some symbols resemble constellations, others mimic animal tracks, wave patterns, or even the rhythmic steps of reindeer hooves. You sit beside a middle-aged man sharpening a bone knife. On his neck is a mark like a double spiral, barely visible under his fur collar. What does it mean? You ask. He thinks for a moment, then replies, Wind. You blink. Wind? Yes. It changes direction. So do I. The symbols here seem less about mythic stories and more about states of being, rooted in land, in weather, in movement. Where Viking tattoos might show Thor's hammer or the Midgard serpent, these marks speak more subtly of seasons, migrations, balance, cold. You learn that tattooing was done with bone or thorn needles, sometimes hammered gently with reindeer antler tools. The pigment might be charcoal, ground bark, or lichen ash. The process was quiet, intimate, done by mothers, by grandmothers, by those who knew the old ways. One woman lifts the hem of her sleeve to show a zigzag pattern on her shoulder. My grandmother gave this to me during the dark season, she says, to keep my thoughts from falling into the snow. You don't even need to ask. You understand. One of the strangest theories you hear that day is about the symbols activating in dreams, becoming bright, even glowing during sleep. A story passed down from one shaman's line says the gods can read these glowing marks at night and whisper back instructions in the wind. You smile. You've seen weirder things. The Sami don't use ink to shout. They use it to guide, sometimes literally. One elder points to the back of her hand, where 3 dots form a triangle. It means I've crossed 3 rivers, she says. So if I die in the snow, someone will know which way I came. It's not poetry. It's survival. You leave the lavu just as the sun kisses the horizon. The reindeer bells chime again, soft, rhythmic, distant. The boy with the fresh tattoo is already riding off, his arms bare, the ink catching sunlight like a whisper of protection. You realize this. Not all Viking Age tattoos came from the Vikings. Some came from their neighbors, their teachers, their rivals. From cultures with deeper ties to land and sky. From people who didn't write sagas in books, but carved them into flesh and memory. As you walk away from the camp, the wind picks up. It brushes your skin like a palm. You glance down at your wrist, half expecting to see a fresh mark. You don't, but somehow, you feel it anyway. You return to the village as the snow begins to melt. Spring in the north isn't a burst of color, it's a slow sigh. Ice recedes in trembling cracks, moss returns in patches, and the river's grown awake. You find yourself back among longhouses and wooden fences. The air now rich with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. But something feels different. You've been looking for tattoos everywhere, on warriors, healers, thralls, women, and wanderers. And now you realize what's been missing: the sagas. You pick up a brittle scrap of parchment from a low shelf in one of the longhouses, a fragment of copied Old Norse poetry. You squint at the runes. There's blood, and battles, and men boasting of courage. But nothing about tattoos, not a word. No hero pausing mid-battle to show off his ink. No lover tracing runes across someone's back. No dragon-slaying warrior lifting his tunic to reveal the Vegvisir beneath his ribs. So, you ask someone about it. A storyteller with a grizzled beard and a memory like a library. He shrugs. Why would they mention it? He says. If everyone had them, there'd be no need. A mainstream fact. Norse sagas, while rich in detail, were written centuries after the Viking Age ended, mostly by Christian scribes in Iceland. These scribes often omitted or sanitized elements of pagan culture they found uncomfortable, irrelevant, or inappropriate to preserve. So if tattoos were common and pagan, they might have been purposefully left out. You sit back and consider. The silence in the text may be a clue, not a gap, like a family recipe that's never written down, because it was always just known. Some scholars argue that tattooing was so ordinary, so woven into everyday life, that it didn't warrant special mention. Others think the Christian scribes editing the sagas deliberately left out tattoo references as they rebranded Viking stories into something more, palatable. Fringe theory? That tattoos were once mentioned, but those specific lines were scraped off early manuscripts by monks. That there are versions of Egil's saga, or the saga of the Volsungs, lost to time that included whole chapters on sacred ink. We don't know. We may never. You find yourself hunting harder, scanning sagas for hidden references. A mention of marked flesh. A warrior whose skin spoke in silence. One tale describes a man who bore the hammer of Thor upon his chest, burned there in youth. Is it metaphor or memory? Historians still argue whether these vague lines are poetic flourishes or subtle clues to tattoo traditions. Most agree the sagas aren't literal history, but they preserve history. And what they don't say sometimes screams louder than what they do. You visit the skalds, the poets. They tell you that body marking was likely considered private, intimate, personal, something not flaunted in songs unless it was essential to the tale. Just as a sword was named and honored, so too might a tattoo have been seen as part of the person, not an accessory, but an extension. One skald recites a verse about a warrior whose body bore the sea's coils and the sky's fingers. You ask what it means. He smiles. You have to see it to understand. And that's the point. These marks weren't for the page. They were for the body. Flesh and ash. Line and bone. You start seeing tattoos in the sagas even when they aren't there. Reading between the stanzas. Watching the heroes strip down for battle. And imagining the ink on their backs. Shoulders. Thighs. Not vanity, but story. Not illustration, but incarnation. You sit by the fire that night, frupto, flipping through a carved slate used for teaching runes. You think about all the names forgotten because they were never written down, but maybe, just maybe, they were tattooed. Imagine a whole epic, passed not by books but by bodies. A man with the first verse on his arm. A woman with the next on her spine. A brother, a sister, a cousin, each bearing a fragment. Together, their skin tells the tale, And if one dies, the story is gone forever, but that, too, is part of it. You lie back and close your eyes. No drums tonight. Just crackling fire and a soft hush of distant waves. In the quiet, you hear it, not in words, but in rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Not every saga is written in ink. Some are carved in silence, and sometimes silence is the only proof that something once mattered deeply. You're standing in a trench now, not a battlefield trench, but an archaeological one. The earth is sliced open in tidy squares, walls of soil cut clean to reveal centuries of human activity. Nearby, a team of researchers in wool tunics and leather boots dig carefully with antler picks, wooden trowels, and gloved fingers. You peer into one of the pits. At first, it looks like just bones and dirt, but then someone lifts a small object into the light, a shard of bone, carved, smooth in some places, serrated in others, stained black. The lead archaeologist leans over your shoulder and says, "We think it might be a tattoo needle." Your pulse quickens. Mainstream fact. Viking archaeological sites have yielded objects that might be tattooing tools, bone needles, soot containers, even pigment-stained combs or knife handles. But because tattoos don't fossilize, these tools remain ambiguous. They could be sewing needles or carving tools, or ritual implements, or yes, tattoo needles. But here's the trick. No one writes tattoo needle on an ancient object, so you're left guessing. One site in Denmark turned up several small bone shards, each sharpened to a fine point and found near a charcoal-stained bowl. Another in Gotland revealed pigment jars nestled beside personal grooming items. A third, in Birka, Sweden, home of that famously debated female warrior burial, included a metal stylus and a pile of soot. Fringe theory? That the soot used in tattoos wasn't just from any fire, but ritually prepared, gathered during a specific season, burned from specific wood, even mixed with bone ash of honored ancestors. That would turn each tattoo into a portable relic, a fragment of your grandmother in the rune over your heart. Literally, you climb out of the trench and walk through the site, boots crunching over loose soil. You pass the remains of longhouses, a smithy, a cook pit. Each place offers something new, a broken spindle, a rusted axe, a bead made of glass so blue it hurts your eyes. And then, in the shadow of a collapsed wall, you find the most surprising artifact yet, a small wooden doll, no taller than your palm. It's faceless, but along its arms and chest, someone has scratched tiny patterns, dots, spirals, miniature runes. Was it a child's toy? A charm? A practice dummy for tattoo apprentices? The site director says they've found several similar figures over the years, none officially classified as tattooed, of course. But the implication hangs in the air. Historians still argue whether Viking children were tattooed, and if so, when? Was it a rite of passage at puberty? A family emblem given at birth? Or something earned? The way warriors earn scars? You head toward the research tent, where objects are laid out on wool blankets, gently cleaned and labeled. One tray contains a flat piece of bone covered in carved runes. You lean closer. Some look like names. Others, maybe spells. One looks eerily like a symbol you saw inked into a woman's back just days ago. You ask the researcher, "What's this from?" He shrugs. Unknown context. Could be decorative. Could be magical. Could be a tattoo design. that phrase sticks with you. Unknown context. It describes almost everything now. You remember the woman with the fox paw tattoo, the man with the Draugr hand, the boy who got a new rune for every birthday. Their stories aren't in books. Their symbols weren't written down. And now, they've become part of the earth, whispers in the soil, echoes in the trenches. You sit on a pile of timber and look out at the dig site. It doesn't look like much, just dirt and dust and bones. But if you listen closely, you can hear it again. Tap, 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 like a heartbeat under the ground. You close your eyes and picture it. Someone crouched over another, needle in hand, soot mixing with blood. The fire crackles. Someone hums a low song. The mark appears slowly, deliberately, like a prayer taking shape. And centuries later, you're standing above it, brushing dust away, trying to remember something no one ever wrote down. Maybe the real evidence isn't in the tools or the pigments or the carved dolls. Maybe it's in the way these stories still pull at you. The way you instinctively look at someone's arm and wonder what it might say. You get up, brush dirt from your hands, ink fades, but the questions don't. And maybe that's the point. You don't expect the next lesson to come from strangers, but that's what they are, foreigners in this Viking world, just like you, travelers from distant lands with different languages, clothes, customs, and yet they're here, trading, observing, writing things down, and they notice the tattoos. You're seated on a fur rug beside a flickering fire in a merchant's hall when someone hands you a weathered parchment scroll. Not Viking made, but something copied from an old account, a voice from far away. The name at the top makes your heart skip. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a 10th century Arab diplomat who traveled far north and met the Rus, a Norse trading people settled along the rivers of what is now Russia. His writings are among the few surviving outside observations of Viking culture, and you read the words aloud in a whisper, heart pounding, from the tips of their fingers to their necks. Each man is tattooed with dark green figures, trees, and symbols. There it is. The first possible eyewitness account of Viking tattoos, not Norse poetry, not broken bone tools. A line from a man who saw them. Mainstream fact. Ibn Fadlan's account, dated around 922 CE, remains one of the most quoted sources when it comes to Viking body art. While some debate the accuracy, was it embellishment, misinterpretation, it's one of the few written descriptions we have that might reference tattoos directly. You lean back, scroll in hand, considering what he saw. Were those trees and symbols spiritual? Clan identifiers? Did they mean I'm a warrior? Or I have children? Or don't mess with me? Or was he describing something else entirely? Fringe theory? Some linguists argue that Ibn Fadlan's term for tattoo could also have meant scarification or painting. That green might have been mistranslated from a word indicating blue or black. That what he saw were dyed scars, ritual ash rubbings, or even decorative skin wounds. Historians still argue how literal to take his description. Were the men tattooed or decorated for a funeral? Was he seeing permanent body art or temporary ink used for ceremony? The ambiguity adds to the mystery and the magic, but he wasn't the only foreigner who noticed. In the centuries that followed, Byzantine, Persian, and later Christian European observers All wrote of northern tribes bearing strange marks on their skin. Some marveled, others recoiled. One chronicler described them as barbarians who carved demons into their flesh. You glance around the room. The man beside you wears a knotwork serpent wrapping his forearm. A woman bears a crescent moon below her jaw. Demons? Or just misunderstood symbols? You chuckle to yourself. One culture's nightmare is another's family crest. What strikes you now is how these outsiders reacted. The fascination, the fear, the othering of bodies marked in ways they couldn't comprehend. You walk out into the chill night and consider how many Viking tattoos were meant for strangers to see, how many were signs, signals, meant to impress or intimidate traders, diplomats, enemies. Some may have even been souvenirs. You've heard stories, rare, half-forgotten, of Vikings visiting foreign lands and returning with borrowed ink, designs copied from Eastern traders, woven with Norse symbolism, a kind of early globalization, tattoos as the first cultural fusion cuisine. One traveler claimed to have seen Norse sailors bearing crescent moons, likely borrowed from contact with Muslim lands. Another wrote of spirals like those from the Celtic world, swirling on the shoulders of warriors whose ancestors came from the West. A merchant you meet, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, speaking a mix of Arabic and Old Norse, shows you his own tattoos, sunbursts, zigzags, and one clear Thor's hammer across his chest. For business, he says, tapping it. Vikings trust me more when I wear their gods. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Don't worry, I trust mine too. It makes you think. How many tattoos in Viking society were strategic? How many were performative? If you could signal piety, strength, loyalty, and heritage with just your skin, wouldn't you? Ink doesn't need translation. A wolf's head snarling on your shoulder says more than a dozen runes ever could. By the fire that night, the merchant tells a tale of a raid he barely escaped. Saved, he claims, because he had the right tattoo. They saw the hammer, thought I was a cousin, let me go. You don't know if he's telling the truth, but you want to believe it, and so you do, because even now, centuries later, tattoos still signal tribe, still shape perception, still open or close doors. The Vikings knew this, perhaps instinctively. They didn't just wear ink, they wielded it. You're back among modern company now, not literally, but the atmosphere feels oddly familiar. You step into a longhouse that feels staged, too clean, too symmetrical. Everyone inside is well groomed, standing just so, smiling just a little too wide. Then it hits you. You're not in Viking Age Scandinavia anymore. You're standing in a 21st century movie set, Hollywood's version of the Viking world, and everyone is tattooed. A warrior with glowing blue knotwork spirals across his shaved scalp. A queen with raven feathers trailing down her spine. Berserkers with faces covered in jagged runes. Eyes rolled back in a fury of CGI-enhanced rage. It looks incredible. It feels fake. You sit on a bench in the corner, watching as someone touches up a fake blood smear. Another actor stretches between scenes. A production assistant asks a question about Viking eyebrow tattoos. Someone else complains their fake ink is starting to itch under the makeup. Welcome to pop culture's Viking tattoo obsession. Mainstream fact. Since the early 2000s, television and film have embraced a highly stylized image of the Viking warrior, often shirtless, sweaty, and covered in elaborate ink. Series like Vikings, 2013, and The Last Kingdom, 2015, popularized this gritty aesthetic. Modern musicians, athletes, and even CEOs have borrowed these designs, wearing Mjolnir pendants and Vegvasir tattoos with pride. It's powerful. But is it accurate? That depends who you ask. Fringe theory? Some argue that modern Viking tattoos are not about history at all. They're about identity projection. People choose these symbols to express modern values: strength, resilience, rebellion. The designs may be Norse, but the meanings, often invented, reimagined, or borrowed from fantasy. You ask a costume artist where their designs came from. She shrugs and says, Pinterest, and some Icelandic magic books. You nod. You've seen this before. Historians still argue whether today's revival of Norse imagery is cultural appreciation, historical romanticism, or something more commercial. On one hand, it connects people to their roots. On the other, it flattens centuries of nuanced belief into a Viking starter pack. Beard, axe, rune tattoo. But you can't help yourself. You like some of the designs. They're bold, visually stunning, intoxicating in their confidence. And if they spark curiosity, if they lead someone to pick up a book or ask a deeper question, is that such a bad thing? Still, there's a danger in believing the aesthetic is the history. You spot an extra sitting beside you, scrolling on their phone between takes, and their entire forearm is inked with intricate Norse runes and symbols. You ask what they mean. She laughs. No idea. I got them because my ex said I looked tough. You both laugh. Then she adds, but they grew on me. Now, I think of them as mine, like I give them meaning. You pause. That's the heart of it, isn't it? Tattoo meaning is never static. It changes over time, across bodies, through stories. Just like in the Viking Age, ink today can be a ritual, a rebellion, or a fashion statement. Sometimes it's rooted in deep tradition. Sometimes it's just cool looking knots. There's a running joke among historians. Every Viking had tattoos, until you ask for proof. But the inverse is also true now. Every tattooed person today becomes a Viking, if only in imagination. You glance around the set. A prop longship is parked just outside. Inside it, fake shields, foam swords, a Bluetooth speaker playing atmospheric throat singing. It's ridiculous, and weirdly beautiful. You sit with it, the mix of fact and fiction, the ancient and the brand new, the way ink carries meaning even when that meaning is invented, because that's what humans do. We tell stories with whatever tools we have, and sometimes those tools are needles and soot, or Hollywood budgets. You think back to the first man you saw, days ago, his back inked with a serpent coiled around a tree. That wasn't a costume. That was lived. But maybe both matter. The line between truth and myth has always been blurry in Viking history. Maybe ink, past or present, is less about what was and more about what we need to believe. You close your eyes, and in the distance, beneath the studio lights, you hear it again. Tap, 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 echoes of an ancient rhythm, still sounding, even under stage makeup. You wander alone now, under a sky that no longer glows silver with northern light, but dims softly, gently, like twilight in a land uncertain of time. The village has grown quiet. The tattooist's fire has burned low. The drumbeat has stopped. The air has shifted to, there's a different tension now. less mythic, more moral. Because here's the truth, not everyone liked the ink. You walk past a small chapel nestled on the edge of the settlement, recently built, its stones still pale, its cross stark against the sky. It's modest, unadorned, but inside, a man in robes is preaching to a small group, and he is not a fan of tattoos. His voice is calm, but the message is clear. The body is sacred, created by God, not to be carved like bark or stained like leather. To mark the flesh, he says, is to dishonor the vessel. Mainstream fact, as Christianity spread through Scandinavia in the late Viking Age, many pagan customs were either adapted or suppressed, and tattooing, with its strong ties to pagan symbolism and ritual, was likely one of the casualties, though no direct bans survive from Viking Scandinavia. Later, Christian Europe saw a rise in anti-tattoo sentiment, especially among clergy. You sit quietly in the back of the chapel, surrounded by women who've begun covering their arms, and men who scrub away ash before entering. You see children staring at their parents' tattoos, then at the priest's clean skin, and you wonder what they're thinking. One woman beside you rubs her forearm unconsciously, the spot where you glimpse a faded tree symbol beneath her sleeve. You whisper, "Do you still believe in it?" She doesn't look at you, just says, "It believed in me. Once." You step out before the sermon ends. Outside, the tension is sharper now. You notice people being more careful. Ink is covered, sleeves are longer, new tattoos are whispered about, not displayed. You meet one man who still wears his proudly, a snake wrapping around his neck, its tongue ending just under his jaw. You ask if he's ever been told to remove it. He grins. They can try. But not everyone is so bold. Some are quietly lasering away their past. Well, not literally. No lasers yet. But people are burning off tattoos with lye, scrubbing them raw with stones, or simply concealing them with shame. Fringe theory? Some historians believe entire families pass down secret tattoos even after conversion, like forbidden spells or hidden names, a kind of spiritual resistance, inked under tunics and beneath petticoats. Proof that the old ways didn't die, they just went into hiding. Historians still argue whether Christianity outright banned Viking tattoos, or if the practice simply faded due to changing values and aesthetics. But we do know this: as the cross replaced the hammer, and parchment replaced oral tradition, fewer and fewer bodies bore the marks of old gods. You return to the tattooist's hut and find it empty. The tools are gone, the soot jars cleaned. A single rune is left scratched into the doorframe. One Joe, the joy rune. You think about what it means to let a tradition die, not through violence, but through silence. And still, the marks don't fully disappear. Later that day, a child shows you something, a smear of soot on her palm, drawn in a loop. Like Mama had, she says, and runs off before you can ask more. And you realize, even in erasure, stories endure. Ink may fade from skin, but not from memory. You sit beneath a birch tree as evening falls. A nearby stream gurgles softly. You think of all the people who wore tattoos not for style, not for intimidation, but for meaning, for protection, for grief, for joy. You think of them covering those marks with sleeves, or burying them beneath new rituals, of parents who stopped tattooing their children, not because they didn't believe, but because it was safer not to. And you wonder, Did they mourn the loss? Did they touch their own fading ink in the dark, whispering to it like an old friend? You think maybe they did. You wake before dawn and wander into the woods, not by accident, but as if something calls you. The trees are tall here, older than the longhouses, older than the village itself. Their bark is weathered and cracked like old skin, and the moss under your feet is thick enough to silence your steps. Birds haven't started singing yet. The world holds its breath. Then you see her. She's seated on a stone by a shallow stream, hair braided in the old way, cloak tucked around her ankles. She's alone, but you sense she isn't lonely. On her arms, ink, not displayed, not hidden, just there, like it's always been. One design coils around her wrist, a braid of fish and serpents. On her ankle, a cluster of stars. Most striking is the tattoo on her throat, a crescent shape pierced with a line, like a rising moon struck by a spear. You sit beside her, uninvited but not unwelcome. After a long pause, she speaks. Do you know what it means? You shake your head. Neither do I. She says, smiling, my grandmother gave it to me when I bled for the first time. She said it would keep the spirits quiet, or maybe call them louder. I forget. She laughs quietly, and you do too. Mainstream fact. In some later Norse-influenced folklore, body markings, especially on women, were associated with second sight, healing powers, or the ability to speak with spirits. Though little archaeological evidence survives, oral tradition hints at ritual tattooing passed between generations, especially among those who served as midwives, wise women, or spiritual guides. You begin to understand, not all tattoos were public declarations. Some were private inheritances. The woman tells you about her mother, marked with the same crescent, and her daughter, who bears a different shape, a wheel, inked low on her back. She'll change it when she's older, the woman says. That's the point. You look at your own skin, still unmarked. You wonder what design would have passed to you if your line had continued without interruption. What story your ancestors would have drawn for you, not in books or names, but in symbols pressed under the skin. Fringe theory? That hidden tattooing tradition survived the Christianization of Scandinavia by transforming, folding themselves into folklore, fairy tales, folk remedies, that what was once sacred became superstition, and from there slipped into secrecy, a spiral on a wooden spoon, a rune drawn in butter, a mark painted onto a baby's foot at birth, meant to disappear, but remembered all the same. Historians still argue whether these folk tattoos existed or are simply imagined. But oral accounts from northern Sweden and Finland describe tattoo-like customs well into the 19th century. Marks drawn with ash or colored clay. Temporary, but heavy with meaning. The woman beside you leans forward and dips her fingers into the stream. She draws a shape in the water, a circle, a line, a second circle. Some say this means protection, she says. Others say it means surrender. Depends on what you need that day. You ask if she still tattoos others. She shakes her head. Only those who ask, without words. You both sit in silence. The first bird sings, high and sweet. The trees stretch as the sky begins to pale. She reaches into her pouch and pulls out a smooth stone, marked with soot. She presses it into your palm. You don't need ink, she says. You're already carrying the story. You look down at the stone. The shape is simple. Three dots in a triangle. You've seen it before. On tools, on skin, on wood. But now it's yours. And you know, tattoos don't always need to be visible. Sometimes they live in gesture, in inheritance, in memory. You rise and begin walking back toward the village. The forest behind you breathes. You think of the people you've met, each one a chapter. Some bold, some hidden, some fading, each carrying their own mark. You run your fingers along your forearm as you walk. It's still bare, and yet it feels full. By now, you know what to look for. The slight flick of a wrist to hide something beneath a sleeve. The way a cloak shifts to reveal a mark on the collarbone. The quiet way people glance at each other's hands before speaking, just long enough to read the story inked into their knuckles. You've become fluent in a silent language, the language of Viking ink, but the people you meet now, they're speaking in two tongues. You're at a gathering, a thing, they call it, not a party, not quite a court, somewhere in between. Elders, warriors, farmers, and wanderers have all come together to settle disputes, make trades, and tell stories. The energy is vibrant, but charged, because some of them are hiding tattoos, and some are not. At the edge of the meeting, a man stands tall with sleeves rolled up, runic lines cut deep across both arms. A statement, a refusal to fold. His symbols are old. Odin's knot, the 9 worlds, stacked vertically like a ladder down his bicep. They're fading, but proud. Beside him stands another man, his arms clean, but you swear you see something peeking just above his collar, a whisper of ink. This is the Viking world in transition. Mainstream fact, the late Viking Age was a time of cultural collision, as Christianity spread and new laws were written down. Old customs, including tattoos, faced new pressures. Converts were often encouraged to abandon visible signs of paganism, and body modification could be frowned upon by the church. Still, traditions didn't disappear overnight. They adapted, or went underground. You overhear 2 women at a trading tent whispering about a midwife who now tattoos in secret, using soot from the last free fire. Someone else mentions a farmer who branded his goats with the same symbol on his shoulder, so the gods know which are his. You smile, not out of mockery, but recognition. This isn't just about rebellion anymore. This is about memory. Fringe theory? Some believe Viking tattoos began to carry secret meanings as Christianity grew stronger, runes that looked innocent but formed hidden messages, a serpent that was also a prayer, a sun wheel with 3 extra spokes that pointed to a buried ritual, a set of dots that, when counted, spelled a forbidden god's name. You hear a tale from a skald about a woman who wore Freya's sigil under her hairline for 40 years, never once exposed it publicly, but rubbed it before every birth she midwifed. No child died, the skald claims. That mark was stronger than any priest's sermon. Historians still argue whether such secret tattoos were real or symbolic. But isn't that the point of symbols, that they can be both? You sit near the fire pit later, sipping something warm and herbal. A boy no older than 10 sits beside you, legs swinging. He asks, "Do you have any?" You shake your head. "Not yet." He nods. "I want one. Papa says I can when I kill my first boar." You raise your eyebrows. He grins. "Just a little one, behind my ear." You smile. The next generation is already dreaming in ink. You glance across the fire at an old woman quietly mending a fishing net. On the backs of her hands, spirals, delicate, faint, but unmistakable. Some stories wear themselves loud, others just last. As the sun begins to set, the thing dissolves. People gather their goods, their goats, their grudges. The tattooed and the unmarked walk side by side, not in opposition, but in overlap. You realize the truth. Viking tattoos didn't vanish. They shifted. What was once proud became private. What was once ritual became resistance. What was once ordinary became sacred. Each mark now carries weight it never did before, because it is chosen in defiance. You leave the gathering just as the sky turns flame orange. A man walks past you, arm bare, but as his tunic lifts in the wind, you catch a glimpse, just a flicker, of something dark along his ribs. You don't say anything, but you nod, and he nods back. You walk along the shoreline now, boots crunching over stones smoothed by centuries of tide. The sea is calm, steel gray. A few gulls circle overhead, and the wind smells of salt and kelp and old fish nets left to dry. You're alone, but not lonely. There's something restful about the rhythm of waves after so many stories. You sit on a driftwood log and look down at your hands, still clean, still bare, and yet you feel marked, because by now, you don't just understand Viking tattoos, you can read them, or at least feel their language. You know the difference between the serpent of vengeance and the one of rebirth, between a crescent worn for protection and one carved for mourning, between a line of runes you chant and one you carry just to remember someone's voice. A boy walks by, barefoot and wrapped in sealskin. He has a fish tattooed behind his ear, small and perfect. He waves. You wave back. You realize you've stopped asking if the tattoos were real. You know they were. Mainstream fact, even without physical skin remains. Viking material culture, from wood carvings to jewelry to bone artifacts, is saturated with symbols, knots, animals, runes. These weren't random decorations. They were a visual vocabulary. And when you live in a world where the body is your only canvas, it's only logical to wear your words. Fringe theory? Some scholars argue Viking tattoos were designed to be read aloud, like a portable poem. Each rune or symbol was a cue for a longer tale, known by the wearer and spoken during feasts or family rites. Your arm wasn't just a mark of who you were, it was a story trigger. You imagine it, a girl sitting by a fire, tracing her father's tattoo, and saying, "This one means the storm that took the boat. This one means how he came back." You look at your own forearm again, still unmarked, but full of echoes now. A woman appears from the dunes. You've seen her before, just briefly, days ago, working dye into wool beside a longhouse. She sits beside you without a word. After a moment, she pulls her sleeve back and shows you her wrist. A new tattoo, fresh, red around the edges, 3 small lines, evenly spaced, like stitches. "What is it?" you ask. "3 things I survived this year," she replies, simply. You nod. "Will you add more?" "If I need to." You both sit in silence, the waves folding toward the shore like fabric. You feel the stone from the rune witch in your pocket. Still cool. Still yours. Historians still argue what meaning truly is, whether it comes from ritual, from language, or from lived experience. But you're not a historian. You're a traveler, a witness, and what you've seen in these Viking tattoos is not uniformity, but choice. Because that's what ink is. In the end, intention. A warrior might tattoo to be seen, a woman to remember. a thrall, to reclaim, a shaman, to speak with wind, a child, just because it makes them feel brave. None of them wrong, all of them right. You think back to the earliest tattoos, soot and bone, fire and pain, the girl who stitched the names of her children into her thigh, the man who carried a skeleton hand to keep the dead away, the priest who spoke against it, the merchant who wore a hammer just to make a sale, and now, the woman beside you. 3 lines of quiet triumph. You realize you've been reading a book all along, one with no pages, no ink, but marked skin by skin, chapter by chapter. You look at the sea again. The tide's coming in. Maybe that's what tattoos are. Tiny rebellions against time. You stand and brush the sand from your coat. The woman stays, watching the waves. You nod once in farewell. She doesn't speak, but she taps the side of her wrist. Lightly. 3 times. Tap. 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 You feel it. Deep in your ribs. Your body remembers. You return to the longhouse one last time. It's empty now. The hearth is cold. The bench is bare. The scent of smoke and meat long since faded into the timber. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. A wolf howls far in the hills, distant enough to feel like memory. You sit on the floor and run your hand along the packed earth. It's rough beneath your fingers, scattered with tiny bits of charcoal, old thread, a forgotten fish bone, the kind of debris that tells the truth. Someone lived here. You think about all the skin that once warmed this space, marked, scarred, sweating, sleeping, bodies curled against firelight, arms wrapped around loved ones, runes pressed into wrists, backs, shoulders. You look around. You see the ghost of a tattooist at her stool, tapping slow rhythms into a young man's thigh. You see a woman tracing the ink over her ribs in silence, her lips moving in prayer. You see a child giggling as her mother draws dots on her knuckles with a charcoal stick. You see a warrior showing his comrades a new mark earned in a far-off raid. You see the faces that once carried meaning, and you realize something strange. You can no longer imagine them without tattoos, because ink in this world was more than skin deep. It was not just art, it was presence. Mainstream fact, in Viking society, identity was performative. Your speech, your dress, your posture, your scars, all help define you. Tattoos, if they were indeed common, would have fit seamlessly into this world. A living resume, a wearable saga, a body not just as flesh, but as statement. Fringe theory? Some believe certain tattoos were designed to vanish with time. Made with transient inks, they lasted a season, a year, long enough to serve their purpose. A ritual mark for a voyage, a grieving symbol that faded when the heart healed. Skin as impermanence. Historians still argue whether this is fantasy or fact. But as you look around this empty space, you begin to see the value in both. You pull out the stone the rune witch gave you, smooth, cold, etched with those 3 dots. You press it to your forehead for just a moment, letting it rest there like a blessing. You think of everything ink once meant here. Ink for courage, ink for grief, ink for motherhood, for vengeance, for laughter, for love, ink to remember, ink to forget, ink that told the gods who you were. And now, the longhouse seems to exhale. You step outside into the dark. The moon is high, casting silver light across the grass. The wind has softened, somewhere, far off. You hear the familiar sound again, not drums, not howling, Not footsteps, just that steady, ancient rhythm. Tap, 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 fading into the trees, but not lost. Never lost. Now, you can rest. The stories have settled. The fires have gone out. The night sky stretches endlessly above you, and the last embers of memory glow like old ink beneath your skin. Breathe in slowly. The world of the Vikings, their longhouses, their gods, their griefs and joys and fading traditions, has folded itself gently into darkness. Their tattoos may have disappeared from flesh, but not from time. They linger in the spaces between silence and story. You are not marked? Perhaps. Not outwardly. But something has settled within you. A quiet understanding. A sense of continuity. A rhythm. You walk no longer through a village, but through memory itself. Each footstep lighter, each breath softer, and the air around you feels warmer now, like a cloak pulled tight across your shoulders. You feel safe here. The echoes of inked prayers and whispered oaths fade into the hush of wind across open fields. Let your body relax. Let your thoughts dim like the fire in the longhouse hearth. Let the rhythm slow. Tap, tap, tap. No need to chase the meaning anymore. You've found it. Or maybe it found you. So drift now, slowly, softly, like a raven coasting on the dusk wind. Your journey is over. Your story, this one, is complete. And whatever mark it leaves on you, may it be gentle. May it be yours. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.